All right, ready to dive deep. Today, it's Friedrich Hegel,
Ooh, Hegel.
one of philosophy's giants, but
Gents.
yeah, let's be honest, dense. A real brain workout. Like, you need a dictionary, maybe an energy drink just to get through a paragraph.
But here's the thing. Even his critics, they can't ignore him.
Right.
He's like a philosophical milestone, you know?
Yeah.
You might come out the other side a little confused, but you've definitely gone through
Oh,
something.
definitely transformed.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, we've got a whole stack of sources here, articles, essays, even some of Hegel's own writings.
Wow.
And we're going to try to distill his key ideas, especially the ones that tend to, make people's eyes glaze over a bit, like reason, contradiction, how individuals relate to society. But before we get to all that, I got to ask about this story I keep hearing about Hegel and a missing planet.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, he predicted a planet between Mars and Jupiter.
Uh-huh.
Not based on any observations or anything, but just through pure reason.
It's a classic Hegel story.
Right.
Really illustrates his faith in what we call a priori knowledge. Knowledge from pure thought, not experience.
Like he thought you could just deduce truths about the universe.
Yeah, starting with basic principles, logic your way through.
But wait, didn't they discover Ceres?
Huh?
The asteroid right where he said the planet should be?
Yeah, and it became a bit of a joke,
Yeah.
at his expense.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But here's where it gets interesting. Hegel might have argued that his reasoning wasn't completely wrong.
Okay.
He believed that facts are never just pure observations. They're shaped by our concepts, the categories we use to understand them.
So he wouldn't have just accepted Ceres like, oh, there's an asteroid.
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
We actually have a source here, the philosopher Victor Gomez Pin.
Okay.
He suggests Hegel might have said, sure, there's something there, but what you call it, planet, asteroid, depends on your framework of scientific knowledge. So the discovery, it challenges this specific conclusion, but doesn't necessarily invalidate the whole point about concepts shaping facts.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah.
That's bending my brain a little bit.
Uh-uh.
What did he mean, like, facts are shaped by concepts?
Well,
a tree's a tree, isn't it?
He was pushing back against this idea that we just passively observe the world.
Okay.
Even when you look at a tree, what you actually see depends on the lens you're using.
Oh, I see.
A botanist, a lumberjack, an artist, they all see something different.
Right.
The tree doesn't change, but how you interpret it, that does.
That's a really good way to think about it. It makes you realize how much even our objective observations, they're kind of subjective. So how does all this tie into his bigger philosophical system?
It's all connected to this idea that reason is the driving force of reality.
Okay.
He believed the world itself is structured according to logical principles, and that by using our reason, we can understand those principles.
Isn't that a bit of a leap of faith, though?
Right.
I mean, the world can be pretty chaotic, pretty irrational sometimes.
That's where Hegel's concept of contradiction comes in.
Okay.
And this is where things get really mind-bending. He famously said, all things are contradictory in themselves.
Wait, doesn't that, contradict basic logic?
It seems that way. But Hegel's playing a different game here. He's making a distinction between understanding, which is bound by those normal rules of logic, and reason, which can handle these apparent contradictions.
Okay, I'm going to need you to unpack that one. What does he mean, reason handling contradiction?
Right. Think about life and death.
Okay.
We usually see them as opposites.
All right.
But Hegel argued that life inherently has the seed of its own death. Life is constantly becoming its opposite.
That's a deep thought.
Right.
Another example, maybe?
Sure. How about movement?
Okay.
For something to move, it has to be where it is and not be where it is all at the same time.
Right.
It's in constant becoming.
So contradiction for Hegel, it's not about things being nonsensical.
Oh.
It's about them always changing, always evolving.
Exactly. And he thinks this applies not just to abstract ideas,
Okay.
but to the world, history, even our own consciousness.
Okay, my brain is definitely getting a workout here. but I'm intrigued. How does this idea of contradiction, how does it play out in how he understands relationships?
That's where his famous master-slave dialectic comes in.
Okay.
Probably one of his most influential and debated concepts.
Really?
It dives into how our sense of self is shaped through interaction with others.
Yeah.
And it's all about how power dynamics maybe aren't what they seem.
Okay, you've definitely got my attention. Let's dive into that master-slave dialectic.
So Hegel asks us to imagine two self-conscious beings meeting for the first time.
Okay.
Each wants to be recognized by the other as free, independent.
Seems pretty straightforward.
Right.
What's the catch?
That desire for recognition, it turns into a struggle for dominance, a battle for control. One becomes the master, the other the slave.
Okay.
But here's the Hegelian twist. The master, by achieving dominance, actually becomes dependent on the slave.
Whoa, hold on. How does that work?
The master needs the slave to work, right? To produce stuff, to maintain the master's whole way of life.
Right.
But the slave, through their labor, starts to understand the world in a deeper way. They're interacting with materials, shaping things.
Yeah.
That gives them a self-awareness. The master, who's removed from all that, never develops.
So the master, obsessed with power, is actually stuck.
Yeah.
While the slave, through their struggle, gains a richer understanding.
Exactly. You can see this dynamic in so many situations. Bosses and employees, political structures, even, personal relationships.
I'm already starting to see things differently, but before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I got to ask about something else that's been bugging me about Hegel. His politics. I mean, the guy supported the Prussian monarchy.
Right.
How do we square that with his ideas about freedom, the dialectic? Seems like a big contradiction.
Yeah, that's where things get tricky. We need to be upfront about the problematic parts of his thinking.
Yeah.
Hegel's political views, they were complex, shifted over time.
Okay.
But ultimately, he landed on the Prussian monarchy as, the best example of a rational state. One that could guarantee individual freedom, but within a well-ordered society.
But isn't that a bit of a cop-out? Saying freedom can only exist within limits set by a king, doesn't that sound kind of authoritarian, especially coming from a guy who's all about reason and progress?
It's a valid criticism.
Yeah.
And one that's been made ever since.
Yeah.
Some see his endorsement of the monarchy as a betrayal of his own principles.
Yeah.
It's a debate that, continues to this day.
So even with something as seemingly straightforward as politics, there's no easy answer with Hegel.
Nope. That's one of the most frustrating and fascinating things about him.
Right. He forces you to wrestle with these big questions, but doesn't offer simple solutions. Well, I'm ready for the challenge. What other Hegelian puzzles do we have in store?
Next up, his take on religion, particularly Christianity.
Ooh, okay.
He had some pretty unconventional views on that, too.
Okay. I'm all ears. Lead the way.
Welcome back to our Hegel deep dive. Last time, we were wrestling with some of his more abstract ideas, like the role of reason, contradiction.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree those concepts aren't exactly light reading.
Right.
But they're also incredibly thought-provoking, and I'm really curious to see how they connect to Hegel's views on history.
Right.
Which is where we're headed next.
Yeah, Hegel's philosophy of history is one of his most ambitious contributions,
Right.
Tried to make sense of the entire sweep of human history through the lens of his philosophical system.
Okay, so how does that idea of the dialectic, the tension between opposites driving progress, play out on this grand stage of history?
Right.
Does he think it's all just one big, messy contradiction?
Well, he saw history as the unfolding of what he called Geist. Geist, which you can translate as spirit or mind.
Okay.
It's this overarching force, moving through history, working itself out through the actions of individual societies.
So it's not just random events.
Yes.
There's a logic, a purpose behind it all.
Exactly.
Like some kind of grand plan.
And that purpose, according to Hegel, is the realization of freedom. He believed history is moving towards a state where humans are increasingly free, individually and collectively.
But how does that happen? I mean, history is full of conflict, depression, setbacks.
Right.
Where's the progress in all that? It seems like every 2 steps forward, we take 1 step back.
That's where the dialectic comes in again.
Okay.
He believed progress happens through struggle, resolution. Societies face contradictions, challenges.
Okay.
These lead to conflict, upheaval.
Right.
But out of that conflict, a new synthesis emerges, a higher form of social organization, one that incorporates the lessons of the previous stage.
So can you give me like a concrete example of how that works?
Sure. Hegel saw the French Revolution as a prime example.
Okay.
The old feudal order, with its rigid hierarchies, inequalities.
Yeah.
It was confronted with those ideals: liberty, equality, fraternity.
Right.
And this led to intense social and political upheaval, culminating in the Reign of Terror. But out of that chaos, Hegel argued, came a new form of political organization, the modern nation-state.
Okay.
Which embodied a higher form of freedom than what came before.
So even the most violent, chaotic periods of history, they can be seen as part of this larger process of progress.
That was his perspective. He believed that history, it's messy, often painful.
Yeah.
But ultimately moving in a positive direction.
But didn't Hegel also say that history reached its endpoint with the Prussian monarchy?
Right.
Doesn't that kind of contradict this whole idea of ongoing progress? It's like saying, we've arrived, folks, nothing more to see here.
Yeah, this is where things get controversial. We need to acknowledge the limitations of his vision. He seemed to think that the Prussian state, with its emphasis on reason, order, it represented the highest form of political organization achieved up to that point.
Mm.
Some argue this led him to a kind of, historical complacency, a belief that the end of history had arrived.
So he was a product of his time, like someone today saying, we've reached peak civilization with the internet and smartphones.
Right.
It's all downhill from here.
You could say that, but it's important to remember, Hegel was a complex thinker.
Right.
His ideas about history have been interpreted in so many ways.
I see.
Some see him as a proto-totalitarian. Others as a champion of liberal values.
Sounds like there's no easy answer when it comes to his political legacy.
Definitely not. But even if we disagree with his conclusions, engaging with his philosophy of history, it makes us ask these big questions.
Yeah.
What's the meaning of history? Is there a purpose? And how does individual freedom fit into the story of human civilization?
Those are questions that are still so relevant today. I mean, I'm thinking about how people are always debating whether technology is a force for good or evil.
Right.
Maybe Hegel can give us some tools for thinking about those kinds of debates.
Absolutely. And remember, Hegel's philosophy of history, it wasn't just about the past.
Okay.
He was also trying to understand the present, anticipate the future. Okay. And that brings us to one of his most intriguing, frankly, strange ideas. The world soul.
Okay, the world soul. That sounds pretty out there. What is it, and what does it have to do with the present and future?
For Hegel, the world soul, or Weltgeist in German, it's a kind of cosmic force.
Okay.
That embodies the spirit of the age, the driving force of historical development. It manifests itself in great individuals who embody the spirit of their time.
Okay.
And shape the course of events.
So these are like historical superheroes, people who are almost destined to change the world.
In a way, yes. Hegel believed these individuals, they aren't just acting on their own. They're instruments of this world soul, carrying out its grand plan.
Okay.
And this is where his famous fascination with Napoleon comes in.
Oh, right.
He saw Napoleon as the embodiment of the world soul in his time.
Wow.
A figure who swept away the old order, paved the way for a new era.
I remember reading that Hegel was supposedly finishing his phenomenology of spirit as the Battle of Jannano was raging outside his window.
Wow.
And he even called Napoleon the soul of the world in a letter to a friend.
That's dedication to your work.
Talk about dedication.
Yeah. It's a great anecdote. It captures his unique blend of philosophical abstraction and real-world engagement.
Right.
He saw in Napoleon like a force of history, a figure who embodied the contradictions of his time and was pushing humanity towards a higher level of freedom.
But wait, didn't Napoleon ultimately lose? Doesn't that kind of undermine this whole idea of the world soul, its chosen instruments?
It does. It's a big contradiction if the supposed soul of the world ends up defeated, exiled.
Right.
And it highlights one of the challenges of interpreting his philosophy of history.
Okay.
Some argue that the failure of figures like Napoleon, it proves that history is more contingent, unpredictable than Hegel believed.
Yeah.
Others suggest his system is flexible enough to accommodate those setbacks.
Okay.
Seeing them as necessary stages in the larger process. It's like saying even the world soul has to learn from its mistakes.
So the debate about the meaning of history, whether there's a purpose to it all, it's still very much alive.
Absolutely. And that's one reason why Hegel remains such a relevant and challenging thinker today.
Mm-hmm.
He forces us to think critically about our own place in history.
Yeah.
To ask, what forces are shaping our world? What role do we play in this ongoing struggle for freedom and progress?
It's like he's that friend who always asks the tough questions that make you really think.
Exactly.
Speaking of freedom and progress, I'm curious to hear more about Hegel's views on the relationship between the individual and society.
Okay.
We've touched on this already, but I think it's worth digging deeper.
Yeah, Hegel's social and political philosophy is deeply connected to his philosophy of history.
Okay.
He believed that humans are inherently social creatures, and that true freedom, it can only be realized within a rational, well-ordered community.
So it's not just about individual liberty. It's about finding your place in a larger social order.
Exactly.
Like saying you can't be truly free if you're living in chaos, anarchy.
Right. He was critical of what he saw as the excessive individualism of the Enlightenment.
Okay.
Which he thought led to a fragmentation of society, weakening those bonds that hold communities together.
I see.
Like too much emphasis on me, myself, and I undermines the foundations of society.
But wouldn't a strong emphasis on social order, wouldn't that potentially lead to, like, suppression of individual rights, freedoms? It sounds like it could easily slide into authoritarianism.
It's a valid concern, one that Hegel's critics have raised repeatedly.
Yeah.
But Hegel himself, he believed that a well-ordered society was not only compatible with individual freedom, but actually necessary for its full realization.
Okay, that's a little counterintuitive. How can placing limits on individual freedom actually enhance it?
Right.
It's like saying you have more freedom to express yourself creatively if you follow the rules of grammar and syntax.
Hegel argued that true freedom, it's not simply the absence of external constraints. It's the ability to act rationally in accordance with universal principles.
Okay.
So it's not just about doing whatever you want. It's about doing what's right, what's good.
I see.
True freedom comes from aligning yourself with the rational order of the universe.
So, in his view, true freedom comes from aligning your individual will with the rational will of the community.
Precisely.
Like saying you're most free when you're playing your part in a well-functioning orchestra.
Exactly. And that's where the state comes in.
Okay.
Hegel saw the state as the embodiment of reasoned ethical principles.
Okay.
In the world, sets the boundaries for individual action, right? Establishes laws, provides the framework for a just and harmonious society.
So he viewed the state as the highest expression of human reason in the political realm. But doesn't that give the state a tremendous amount of power over individuals?
It certainly does.
It sounds like it could easily become a tool for oppression.
It's another controversial aspect of his thought. Critics see in his philosophy a potential justification for authoritarianism,
right?
A state that dictates to individuals.
Yeah.
They worry about his ideas being used to justify a big brother state.
And yet Hegel himself was a strong advocate for individual rights and freedoms, but within the context of this rational state. How do we reconcile those seemingly contradictory impulses? It's like saying you're a champion of free speech, but only within limits of what the government deems acceptable.
Right, that's the million-dollar question. I think it's one that we'll continue to grapple with, throughout this deep dive.
Yeah.
But one way to understand his position, I think, is to see him as trying to strike a balance between individual autonomy and social order.
Okay.
He believed both are essential for a flourishing society. And the state's role is to create the conditions where both can thrive.
So he was looking for that sweet spot between too much individual freedom and too much state control.
Exactly.
But how does all this connect back to his overall philosophical system, his ideas about reason, contradiction, the unfolding of history? It seems like we've gone from these abstract ideas to concrete political institutions.
Right, that's where things get really interesting. Hegel believed that the development of human freedom, both individually and collectively, is a process of overcoming contradictions. Societies face challenges, conflicts, but out of the conflicts, new and higher forms of social organization emerge.
It's like saying that every social revolution, however messy and violent, ultimately contributes to the progress of humanity.
Exactly.
So it's that same dialectical process, the tension between opposites driving progress that we saw in history and even in individual consciousness.
Right.
It's like he's saying the same logic governs the evolution of the universe, the development of societies, even the growth of our own minds.
Exactly. And he believed that the state, it's not static, it's part of this ongoing process of development. He saw in the Prussian monarchy of his time the the highest form of the rational state that had been achieved.
So even though he championed the Prussian monarchy, he wasn't naive enough to think it was the end of the story.
Right, exactly. He believed that the state, like everything else, is subject to this dialectical process of history. It's constantly evolving, striving to achieve a higher level of rationality, freedom.
So a complex and even utopian vision, but one that's deeply rooted in his faith in the power of reason to shape the world. It's like he's like an architect who designs a grand blueprint for a perfect city, knowing that it might never be fully realized, but believing that the very act of striving towards that ideal, that's what makes us human.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
Hegel's social and political philosophy, it is challenging and at times problematic.
Yeah.
But it forces us to think about the nature of freedom, the relationship between the individual and society, and the role of the state in shaping our lives.
And I think it's especially relevant today as we grapple with the challenges of globalization, technological change, political polarization. His ideas offer us a framework for understanding the complexities of our time, for thinking about the kind of future we want to create. It's like he's giving us a set of lenses to view the world.
I completely agree. Engaging with Hegel, it's not about simply agreeing or disagreeing.
Right.
It's about using his ideas as a springboard for our own reflections on these big questions about human existence, social organization, the meaning of history.
It's like he's that wise old sage sitting on a mountaintop, offering these cryptic pronouncements that challenge us to find our own path to enlightenment.
Well said.
Well said. And speaking of big questions, there's one aspect of Hegel's thought that we haven't touched on yet, and it's one that I'm particularly interested in. His views on art aesthetics.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like a bit of a departure from his focus on reason and history, but I'm curious to hear how he fits art into his grand philosophical scheme.
Right. Hegel's aesthetics. It's another fascinating and often overlooked dimension of his work. Yeah, he actually wrote a lengthy section on art in his Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences.
Wow.
And he gave several lectures on the subject throughout his career. He didn't see art as just a frivolous pastime.
Right.
Or a mere form of entertainment. For him, it had a much, much deeper significance.
I have to admit, I'm a little surprised to hear that a philosopher like Hegel, who's known for his abstract and complex ideas, had so much to say about something as seemingly subjective and emotional as art.
Right.
It's like finding out that a theoretical physicist also has a passion for poetry.
That's where Hegel's genius lies.
Yeah.
He was able to connect even the most seemingly disparate areas of human experience to his overall system.
Okay.
And for Hegel, art wasn't just about personal expression or emotional release. He saw it as a crucial stage in the development of human consciousness, a way for Geist or spirit to manifest itself in the world.
So art plays a role in this grand historical drama of realizing itself in the world.
Exactly.
Like saying that every great work of art is a brushstroke on the canvas of human history.
Exactly. Hegel believed that art, at its highest form, allows us to glimpse the absolute, to grasp the unity of the world and our place in it. He saw great art as a kind of window into the divine. But he also saw art as a historically conditioned phenomenon.
Okay.
He argued that different historical periods, they produced different forms of art.
Right.
Reflecting the dominant ideas, values of those times.
So the art of ancient Egypt would be very different from, say, the art of Renaissance Italy.
Exactly.
Reflecting the different stages of consciousness those societies had reached.
Precisely. He saw ancient Greek art as embodying this kind of harmonious unity between humanity and nature, a sense of balance, proportion that reflected the Greek worldview.
Right.
But as history progressed, human consciousness developed. Art began to reflect a growing awareness of the complexities, contradictions of life.
Okay.
The serenity of classical art, it gave way to the dynamism and drama of the Baroque.
Yeah.
And then to the emotional intensity of Romanticism.
And how did Hegel view the art of his own time? Did he see it as the culmination of this historical process?
Well, he believed that the Romantic art of his era, it was moving towards this kind of self-conscious subjectivity.
Okay.
where the artist's individual perspective, emotions became central.
Right.
But he also saw this as a potential danger, a sign that art was becoming detached from its connection to the absolute and in danger of becoming mere entertainment.
Oh, I see.
Like he worried that art was losing its spiritual depth, becoming too focused on just individual expression.
So he was a bit of a critic of the art of his own time.
You could say that. But it was a critique rooted in his belief that art had a higher purpose,
right,
that it could offer us a glimpse into the deeper meaning of reality. He wanted art to elevate us, to connect us to something larger than ourselves.
I'm starting to see how Hegel's aesthetics connects to his broader philosophical project.
Mm-hmm.
He saw art as a way for us to understand ourselves in the world,
right,
but also as a reflection of the historical forces that shape our consciousness.
Exactly.
He viewed art as both a product and a driver of human progress.
Exactly. And I think his ideas about art can still resonate with us today.
Yeah.
They challenge us to think critically about the art we consume and to consider its deeper meaning, purpose. They encourage us to ask, what does this work of art say about the human condition? How does it connect to the larger story of our civilization?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've explored his philosophy of history, his intriguing idea of the world soul, even his views on art and aesthetics. It's been a whirlwind tour of some of the most challenging, thought-provoking ideas.
It has, and we've seen how all these seemingly disparate ideas are connected by his grand philosophical vision. You know, his belief in the power of reason to shape the world, to drive humanity towards a higher level of freedom, understanding he's like a master weaver.
Right.
Taking seemingly unrelated threads, weaving them into this complex, beautiful tapestry.
But there's still more to explore. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll delve even deeper into his philosophy, tackling some of his most challenging concepts and grappling with the enduring legacy of his thought.
We'll see how his ideas have influenced thinkers across the political and philosophical spectrum. And we'll consider how his work continues to resonate with us today.
And we'll also explore some of the criticisms that have been leveled at Hegel,
right,
both in his own time and in the centuries since his death. We'll see that he wasn't without his flaws, but we'll also come to appreciate the enduring power of his thought to provoke us, to challenge us. So buckle up, folks. The ride's not over yet. We're going to finish strong with a final push into the heart of Hegelian thought. Back again for more Hegel.
I feel like we've been spelunking through some seriously dense philosophical caves here.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
We've tackled reason, contradiction, history, art,
the whole Hegelian landscape. And
even Hegel admitted his writing wasn't exactly, beach reading.
No, not exactly known for his clarity. There's a famous quote from one of his contemporaries. It said, "Trying to read Hegel is like looking into a dark room full of black cats at midnight."
So if we're feeling a little brain fried at this point, we're in good company.
Definitely.
But I think we've made some good progress, unpacked some key concepts, started to see how they connect. Yeah, we've seen how he believed that reason unfolds in history through this dialectical process, right?
Right.
Working through contradictions to reach a higher synthesis.
Yeah, and we talked about how he saw this happening on a grand scale in societies, even in our own lives. And of course, we had to, confront some of the more problematic aspects of his thinking.
His political views, his support for the Prussian monarchy.
Yeah, important to be honest about the fact that some of his conclusions are tough to reconcile with, modern ideas.
Yeah, but individual freedom, democratic values, all of that.
But I still think there's a lot we can learn from him, even if we don't agree with everything.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the most valuable things, I think, is that he teaches us to think critically.
Yeah.
To look for those underlying patterns, the connections that we often miss in, the everyday rush of things.
It's like he's that friend who's always pointing out things you never would have noticed on your own.
Right, exactly.
Making you see the world in a totally new way. He's definitely challenged me to think differently.
Yeah.
Speaking of challenging ideas, I think one of the most striking examples is his master-slave dialectic.
Oh, yeah.
We touched on this earlier, but I think it's worth another look.
I agree. It's a complex concept, but it really gets to the core of how he understood self-consciousness.
Yeah.
And the dynamics of power.
So remind me of the basic setup again. I know it involves two people, a struggle for recognition, and then some surprising twists.
Right. So Hegel asks us to imagine two individuals meeting for the first time.
Okay.
They both want to be recognized by the other as free, independent beings, worthy of respect, dignity.
Seems like a pretty natural human desire.
Absolutely. We all want to feel seen, acknowledged.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. That desire for recognition, it can lead to a struggle for dominance.
Mm-hmm.
A fight for who's on top. One becomes the master, the other the slave.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like that classic story of the alpha male asserting dominance.
Right.
But where does the dialectic, that tension between opposites, come in?
That's where Hegel's genius really shines through.
Okay.
He argues that the master, in achieving dominance, actually becomes dependent on the slave. The master relies on the slave's labor, right, to produce the goods, the services that maintain the master's whole lifestyle.
Okay.
The slave, on the other hand, while seemingly subservient, they actually develop a deeper understanding of the world through their work.
How so?
They engage with the material reality of things. They transform nature through their labor.
Right.
And in doing so, they gain this self-consciousness that the master, who's detached from all that, never achieves.
So it's a paradox. The master who thinks they're in control is actually trapped.
Yeah.
While the slave, through their struggle, actually gains greater understanding.
Exactly. It's a brilliant inversion of our typical assumptions about power or knowledge. And it has huge implications for how we think about social relationships, political systems, even our own, individual journeys.
Right. Right.
It's a reminder that true power often lies in the hands of those who are willing to get their hands dirty, to engage with the world.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how this concept could be applied to so many different areas of life. It makes you realize that power dynamics are often far more complex than they appear, and it makes you wonder, who are the real masters and slaves in our society?
That's a great question, and it's one that Hegel's work invites us to ask.
Yeah.
He encourages us to look beyond the obvious, to question our assumptions, to embrace the complexity of the world.
Yeah.
He's like a guide leading us through a labyrinth, showing us that the path to truth, it's rarely straightforward.
But let's not forget that Hegel's philosophy isn't just about, abstract ideas.
No.
It's also deeply connected to his understanding of history, the forces that shape us.
Right. And I think one of the most important things to remember about his philosophy of history is that he saw it as a progressive process, one that's ultimately moving towards a greater realization of freedom, reason.
He believed in progress despite the tragedies, the setbacks.
He did.
But as we discussed earlier, he also seemed to think that this process had reached its culmination in the Prussian state of his time.
Right.
And didn't that lead him to a kind of historical complacency?
It's a point of contention among Hegel scholars.
Okay.
Some argue that his later writings suggest a kind of historical endgame, while others see him as more open to the possibility of, ongoing development change. They point out that he was always emphasizing the dynamic, evolving nature of reason.
So it's hard to imagine him thinking history had just stopped.
Right.
So there's no easy answer. Typical Hegel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think even if we don't agree with his conclusions, his philosophy of history forces us to grapple with some really big questions. What is the meaning of history? Is there a purpose? What role do individuals, societies play in shaping things?
Yeah.
He's asking us to think about whether history is just a random series of events or if there's some underlying logic, direction to it all.
And those are questions that are still relevant today. I think his ideas can give us a valuable framework, even if we don't buy all of his answers.
I agree.
It's like he's a time traveler, come back to give us clues about where we're headed.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Engaging with Hegel, it's not about simply agreeing, disagreeing.
Right.
It's about using his ideas as a springboard for our own reflections.
On those big questions about existence, about society, the meaning of it all.
Exactly. He's not giving us a map, but he's offering a compass, a way to orient ourselves.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From his abstract ideas to his complex and often controversial views on everything. He's challenged us, provoked us, hopefully inspired us to to think differently.
And I think that's the greatest tribute we can pay to any philosopher, to take their ideas seriously, to engage with them, and to let them spark our own intellectual journeys.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, keep those minds churning, keep questioning, keep exploring, and maybe even pick up a book by Hegel if you're feeling adventurous. Just be sure to have a dictionary and a strong cup of coffee handy.